Wengert. Winds it up, delivers. Thome drills one high and deep to center. Away, way back. Gone deep into the picnic plaza, and that might have even got out of the ballpark. Jim Thome has just left Jacobs Field onto Eagle Avenue. That will take 2 tape measures.
All right, welcome back, everyone. This is episode 2 of Just a Bit Outside, our Cleveland Indians podcast here at Buckeye Scoop. I am your host, Brandon Castell, and I'm excited to be back with you after a phenomenal opening weekend in Cleveland. Finally had some live sports, so hopefully you got a chance to enjoy it. And I especially hope you got a chance to enjoy the Indians starting pitching over the weekend. I know I was able to sit outside on the patio at a local establishment here in Cleveland and watch some of the game on Saturday night on the big screen. Of course, we wore our masks into the establishment, but it was great to be out in the weather, watching the Indians, watching some real, live, meaningful baseball over the weekend. So I know I enjoyed it. Hopefully you got to do a little bit of the same. Of course, that was the one game the Indians didn't manage to win over the weekend, taking 2 out of 3 from the Kansas City Royals in their opening series. Although they definitely should have won that game on Saturday. They really should be sitting at 3-0 coming out of the opening weekend. But of course they did not. They had the bases loaded in the bottom of the 9th. And in normal life, you would have had a stadium of fans going crazy, making it hard for the Royals to get their signs in, putting the pressure on the pitcher, Scott Barlow. But instead, you had a quiet stadium with just the piped-in music. I'm not going to blame that on why the Indians didn't pull out the win. There are no excuses. When you have the bases loaded in the bottom of the 9th with 1 out, all you need is 1 run. You're going to win this game in walk-off fashion. And the Indians just didn't get it done. And so they didn't get the win on Saturday night, and instead the Royals end up winning the game in extra innings, despite the fact that they had 0 official at-bats in the 10th inning. So we'll talk a little bit about that. The new rule here for extra innings, the Royals started the 10th with a ghost runner on second because of the new rules and never recorded a single hit in order to get the 3-2 victory. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Obviously, Indian starter Mike Clevenger was not happy about that and did not like the new rule change. In fact, he called it, quote-unquote, these are his words on Twitter, not mine, the wackest shit he's ever seen. So we'll get into the new extra innings rule that led to the first and only victory of the season for the Royals thus far. But that was not the biggest storyline of the weekend, really not even close, even though we will definitely dive in and certainly would love to get your opinions, but I'll give you mine on the extra inning rule and whether I think that's something that will be around for the long term. One of the other top storylines coming into this season, which we covered on episode 1, was life after Corey Kluber. And I had actually planned to open this episode by talking about Shane Bieber and his remarkable performance on opening night. You know, after Friday night, heading into the rest of the weekend, I figured that was going to be the storyline of the weekend. That was going to be the biggest kind of headline coming into today, and of course that turned out not to be the case. So we will get into that in the episode and whether it's too early to start the hype train for Shane Bieber, whether we need to get Justin Bieber involved in the hype train for Shane Bieber to win American League Cy Young Award. And, of course, we'll see what happens with COVID-19 and everything now that's coming out with the Miami Marlins. Maybe Shane Bieber will win the Cy Young Award in 2020 after 1 start. I certainly hope not, but we'll see what happens there. We'll get into that on this episode. We'll also get into Jose Ramirez and his big weekend. What could that mean for the Indians? Again, this is a guy who has been a key for the Indians the last 3 seasons, but we all know last season, really not the start that he wanted. We'll talk a little bit about that and whether this is that turning point for him to start the season on a hot note. We'll touch a little bit on Francisco Lindor and his slow start. But before we get into anything else, we have to start with the biggest storyline of the weekend, really the thing that everyone should be talking about today, if not for those Miami Marlins, which would be Carlos Carrasco, Cookie Carrasco, taking the mound on Sunday for Game 3 of the weekend series. And what an exciting moment. To be honest, even more than that bottom of the 9th situation, that was the moment where I wish that there had been fans in the stadium for Cookie Carrasco making his first start since last May when he was diagnosed with leukemia. And so this was a big moment for Carrasco, for the Indians, for his whole family. Even though he did return to action last September, he after his kind of stint of absence because of leukemia, he actually did come back, which in and of itself is just incredible. An amazing accomplishment that he was able to return last September as a reliever out of the bullpen for the Indians. Of course, he's been a starter for his career in Cleveland, so obviously that was a strange transition, and we'll get into a little bit of that. But incredible that Cookie Carrasco was even able to find himself back on the mound, making this start, and especially when you consider what's going on right now, right? People are at risk, and so for him to be able to put himself in that position, and obviously the Indians did a great job making sure that he was kept safe, that he was even more socially distanced than the rest of the players, given that he's in a higher risk category. But obviously this was an important moment for Carlos Carrasco, for his family, for everyone around Cleveland. This is a guy who really has grown up and been a part of the organization since really the beginning of his career. And so what a tremendous moment for him, and what an exciting thing to watch as an Indians fan. What an incredible moment for the city of Cleveland. And before I kind of dive into what happened on Sunday, I want to talk a little bit about what happened last year. So if you aren't familiar with what happened with Carlos Carrasco last year, after having two tremendous back-to-back seasons in Cleveland, early in the season last year started to experience some fatigue. He felt like he didn't have his normal energy, his normal strength. Went in to start getting some tests. That ended up becoming a blood test. And then, of course, they discovered that he had leukemia. And this is a form of cancer that really, you go back 20, 30 years, it was not really treatable. And so it's really just modern medicine and some of the advances in some of the medications that are available today that allowed Carlos Carrasco really to be able to make this remarkable recovery. And so I want to kind of start with something that is a little bit serious, maybe more serious than what we would typically get into on this podcast. But I'm going to read something that Carlos Carrasco wrote for the Players Tribune on September 27th of 2019. So this is after he came back. He's pitching for the Indians last year out of the bullpen, really just limited to about one inning a game because of fatigue and really not knowing if he would even have the arm strength to be the player that he was before kind of going through some of these treatments. But I'll read a couple lines that I thought were, really impactful for me. I really encourage you to go out and read this if you haven't. He wrote an article for the Players Tribune in September of last year, and so I think this is a really powerful statement. There's a lot that he put into this. Really, it's one of the longer articles that I've read on this topic, and really anything that has been put out by the Players Tribune. And so I'll read a couple lines of this because for me it was impactful. I started tearing up a little bit just because you think about someone going through this kind of battle and the things that they experience. So he started it by saying 10 seconds. That's what it was, almost exactly. And that's how long I was sitting there in the hospital thinking that I was going to die, thinking about no longer being on this earth. And so that's a pretty impactful thing when you think about somebody, after getting that diagnosis, not thinking about sports anymore, but really thinking about whether or not they were going to be around for their kids, whether they were going to be around for their wife. And so, that was a crazy moment for him. He says it was like 2 seconds of thinking, this is really it for me, I'm going to die. And then 3 seconds of extreme sadness, and then 5 seconds of thinking about his family. And he called it the worst 10 seconds imaginable, as you would certainly think. Here's what he said. He said, it seemed to last forever, like those 10 seconds were actually days and days, where all I could think about was dying. It was all just very dark and sad. I wouldn't wish those 10 seconds on anyone. And then, of course, he said in a blink of an eye, everything changed. His wife was the one that really gave him the strength and courage to go on, told him that he was going to be fine, that he was tough, that he can do this, that he'll beat this. And that was what he really needed to hear. And so, obviously, the team rallied around him. He mentioned in the article Francisco Lindor, when he finally did tell the team, was really the first one to come over to him, let him know that he's not alone, that they were going to fight this together. And so I thought that was really cool to hear as a guy who, everyone in the city of Cleveland loves and really around Major League Baseball. I think that was an important thing to hear, that the team really rallied around him. There were other folks as well who were on the team, guys he had played with in the past, obviously, that rallied around him. But, an incredible comeback story. And so when he came back last September, he only pitched 15 innings for the Indians the rest of the season. spent the time really getting back into the swing of things with sports. But it was such a moment that was bigger than sports. And, he went on to say at the time in September that he was back to feeling 100%. He said, "I'm more optimistic than ever. And thanks to this incredible city and the people of Cleveland who have showed me so much love, and the doctors and caregivers who oversaw my recovery," of course he was at the Cleveland Clinic, "I can say for certain that I'm not going anywhere." And so what an incredible moment on Sunday when, after he spent the time this offseason getting his form back, getting his strength back, getting himself back to the guy who was one of the better pitchers in the American League, on what we saw on Sunday was really just magical. He certainly wasn't perfect, but it was the perfect return to starting for a guy who won 18 games in 2017. He won 17 games in 2018 before the diagnosis. And so this was a guy who was really going to be counted on at the front end of your rotation. And then certainly as you think about, moving on from Corey Kluber, moving on from Trevor Bauer, this is a guy that they are going to be counting on. And at this time last year, no one knew if Carlos Carrasco would ever pitch again. There was no certainty that he was ever going to make a return to the major league. So incredible to see what he did on Sunday in the third game of the season, the final game of the weekend series. Carrasco pitched 6 innings. He allowed 2 runs on 5 hits, walked 1, and struck out 10. And so that was really the key to me. He seemed to be getting stronger as the game went on, struck out the side in the 6th. He was throwing in the low to mid 90s, 93, 94, which is exactly where they wanted him to be. That was the really big indicator for me, was would he be able to get that velocity back into that 93, 94 mile per hour range. And he was able to do that on Sunday and keep it there. As he went into the 5th and 6th inning, he was still throwing with that same velocity. So they brought him back out in the 7th, and then Bradley Zimmer couldn't track down a deep fly ball. Tough catch, just got over his head in center, and that was it. They decided to turn things over to the bullpen to finish the job, which they did. Makes sense, no reason to push Carrasco far on his opening return to starting for the Cleveland Indians, but truly a special day. And even though he pitched in Cleveland last September, and I know that was a very emotional experience, and he was a part of the All-Star festivities last year in Cleveland as well, it would have been an incredible moment for the city, for Carrasco, for the fans. Had we had that usual experience where you have a stadium full of people, there would have likely been quite the standing ovation when Terry Francona finally made that trek out to the mound to take the ball from Carrasco. That would have been quite a scene. But incredible to see what he was able to do, and really for him, obviously, such an important moment. I can only imagine what he's going through, what his family's going through, the emotions that they have in coming back and having that kind of success. And then for the Cleveland Indians, I mean, this is really something that could really launch this team into being a true contender. Obviously, if you've got 3 guys like they have at the front end of this rotation, with Shane Bieber, with Mike Clevenger, and now with Carlos Carrasco, you're not relying on those guys on the back end to be quite as good as maybe you needed them to be if Carrasco doesn't make this return. And so now if he can continue that, and obviously if we can continue this season, I think you've got a really good chance to have, if not the best rotation, or at least front end of the rotation in the American League, one of the best rotations in the American League. And so obviously that was the big storyline over the weekend. That was kind of the thing that really had to be number one on the list, even though, again, I had planned to lead off with Shane Bieber. And so we'll transition here a little bit into Shane Bieber and his performance on Friday night. So again, we're talking about the starting pitchers for this team, and that was really kind of the headline over the weekend, was the job that these starters did and really put them in a position to win all 3 games. Obviously, they only took 2, but Mike Clevenger put his team in a position to win the game on Saturday, and then Friday night, of course, it was Shane Bieber, really the Shane Bieber show. Shane Bieber was really incredible, unhittable on Friday night in the season opener. He went 6 innings. Again, remember, these guys have not been out there really in a spring training environment. You could see that a little bit. Some guys bobbled balls, didn't necessarily judge things correctly. I think that maybe in the middle of the season, had this been a normal year, possibly Bradley Zimmer catches that ball, that deep ball to center in the 7th. But regardless, I thought it was pretty incredible the way that some of these starters came out and had their best stuff right out of the gate. And certainly Shane Bieber had his best stuff on Friday night. He went 6 innings, gave up 4 hits, struck out 14 of the 23 batters he faced. 14 out of 23. So set a franchise record for opening day with the Cleveland Indians when he recorded his 13th strikeout, and then, of course, ended up with 14 to finish the game. And so really an incredible performance by Shane Bieber in his first outing of the year, the Indians' first game of the year, and already we're starting to hear some hype. We're starting to hear some folks talking about Shane Bieber for the Cy Young Award. We're starting to talk about maybe is Shane Bieber one of the best pitchers in baseball at this point, at least one of the better young pitchers in baseball. He's 25 years old, and if he continues to pitch like he did last season, like he did on Friday night, I think he's going to be right up there with the best in the league. He certainly has one of the best curveballs in baseball, and so as long as he's throwing that curveball in and around the strike zone, I think this guy is going to be pretty unhittable. I think he's going to be right there among the top pitchers in baseball. Let's not forget, Shane Bieber finished 4th in Cy Young voting last season. He was an all-star last season. He had a 3.28 ERA and a 1.05 whip in 33 starts. So those numbers alone are all-star caliber. He also struck out 259 hitters in 214 innings. And again, I think what makes Shane Bieber so dangerous and what makes him one of the better pitchers in baseball if he's pitching like he did on Friday night is the fact that he can really get you out with that curveball. And he doesn't have to rely on throwing 97 and blowing one past you. He's not Ricky Vaughn, throwing one by you. He's going to be a guy who can get you out because he can throw that curveball close enough to the strike zone that you absolutely cannot lay off. And that's what we saw on Friday night. He had 21 swinging strikes. 13 of them were on his curveball. And a number of other curveballs where guys just had no idea what to do, so they didn't swing and had a backwards K on those. But again, incredible performance on Friday night. I'll post some of the videos on my Twitter account. You can follow me at BcastOhio on Twitter. If you have some thoughts, comments, feedback, you can also send that to me in a direct message or follow me, as I mentioned, on Twitter. And I will post some videos there of Bieber and his performance on Friday night. There's one particular video from Rod Friedman at Pitching Ninja that shows his 94-mile-an-hour fastball overlaid with his 83-mile-an-hour curveball. And when you see that video, you'll realize that that's why hitters had no chance. That's why those guys could not get anything that he was throwing up there on Friday night. At one point, he struck out 9 of 11 batters. And so really this guy was unhittable on Friday night. And again, if you put him together with Clevenger, who I think has a chance to be an elite pitcher as well when he's on, and then obviously if you put them together with a Carlos Carrasco, a healthy Carlos Carrasco, I think you've got a chance to have a fantastic front end to your pitching staff. The other thing that was interesting about Bieber on Friday night was that he's starting to use his changeup. So this is a pitch that he hadn't necessarily felt extremely comfortable with in the past, and so just now starting to use that changeup and be able to get guys out. In fact, his final strikeout of the game came on an 87-mile-an-hour changeup against Alex Gordon in the 6th inning. That was strikeout number 14. So if he can throw that pitch for strikes, and he can combine that with his 94-mile-an-hour fastball, and obviously one of the most lethal curveballs in the game, I think you're talking about a guy who is only really starting to hit the prime of what he can be at 25 years old. So check out my Twitter if you want to see some videos of that at BcastOhio, and you'll be able to see that there. You can also follow this podcast on Twitter. We are at Just Outside Pod. So Just Outside Pod. If you search for that, you can find it on Twitter. Of course, you can always follow all the podcasts for Buckeye Scoop by following Scoop Pods, and be able to connect with all the great podcasts that we're offering here at Buckeye Scoop. But would love to have you share your feedback. If you have any thoughts on the show, you want to be featured on the show, you can always post something either to myself at BcastOhio, or you can post something to the podcast at Just Outside Pod, and we'll make sure to kind of take a look at your feedback, your thoughts on this show and on the topics that we're covering here. With that, we'll transition to another topic that I wanted to cover from over the weekend. Obviously, this is not going to be as much fun or a topic that's as exciting as Carrasco and Bieber and some of the other things that we saw with the Indians starting rotation over the weekend. But since we're talking about these guys and really the storyline of replacing Corey Kluber, wanted to touch on what we saw with Corey Kluber over the weekend. So obviously the Indians traded Corey Kluber in the offseason. He had been the team's ace for a number of years, and so Kluber was getting a fresh start with the Texas Rangers and was making his start on Sunday. And of course, that did not go well. Corey Kluber lasted only one inning, not because he got ran out of the game or he got shelled, but really because of an injury. And so did not feel comfortable making throws, started to feel some discomfort in his shoulder, so he was lifted from the game after one inning. And we came to learn that now Corey Kluber has a grade 2 tear of a major muscle in his pitching shoulder. So he's going to be shut down for at least 4 weeks before he'll be reevaluated. And really the message that we're hearing, the message that's out there right now, is that he may not pitch again this season. According to Evan Grant of the Dallas Morning News, who covers the Rangers, he said that if he returns this season, and it's a big if at this point, it would likely be as a reliever. And so that is obviously not great news. I think the city of Cleveland still has a lot of love for Corey Kluber and probably always will. And so not what people in Cleveland wanted to see for Corey Kluber, but again, one of those moments where the Indians front office probably made the right move at the right time, recognizing, after Kluber missed the majority of last season, that he was getting to that point in his career where he may not be able to stay healthy, considering the miles, considering the innings that he has over the last decade, really. And really, that's kind of been his undoing, is the amount of volume that he's had in Cleveland over the last decade. He was really the ace of this staff for a long, long time. I mean, he made 203 regular season starts with the Indians. He won 98 games with this team. And so, he's one of those guys that will go down as one of the all-time great players in Cleveland Indians history, one of the all-time great pitchers in Cleveland Indians history. Finished his career in Cleveland with a 3.16 ERA. Think about that. In the modern era of baseball, a guy finishing his career in with a team and being in Cleveland as long as he was with a 3.16 ERA. He struck out 1,461 batters in 1,341 innings pitched. So this guy was one of the all-time great Indians when he was here. So just really unfortunate, especially after last season. He pitched only 35 innings last season because of the fracture in that right arm. And so you wonder if maybe it's all connected, right? That could be related back to some of the rehab, could be related back to some of the recovery. But whatever it is, it sounds like Corey Kluber will likely miss the 2020 season. Obviously, it's only a 60-game season, so maybe he could have returned in a normal season, at least at some point. But when you're looking at a 4-week period, at least a month before you're going to be reevaluated, and there's only 60 games in the season, barring a delay or something else because of the dreaded COVID-19, we're probably looking at the end of the season for Corey Kluber. So that would be back-to-back seasons for Corey Kluber where he really has not pitched at all. So obviously not a good situation for those in Cleveland that still have a lot of love for Corey Kluber. And so I think that's not something that anyone wanted to see, obviously. But this guy had a tremendous career with the Indians. So even if he doesn't come back and he's never the guy that he was before, he's one of those guys that will always be remembered in Cleveland. And really, if you think about the modern era of Cleveland Indians baseball, he may be, at least, if not at the top of the list, he's close to the top of the list in terms of the best pitchers the Indians have had really in modern history. Really, if you'd have to go back to the 60s and 70s to really find guys who have done what Corey Kluber did in Cleveland. And so he's ranked 23rd all-time in Indians history in earned run average, one spot ahead of Herb Score. But not a lot of guys on that list ahead of him have pitched in the modern era of baseball. The all-time leader in Indians history, anyone know what that is? I had to look that up myself as I was kind of doing some research. Obviously, they've had some tremendous pitchers in Indians history. Thought maybe Cy Young might be number one on the list, but he's actually number 6. Number 1 on the list is Addie Joss. So Addie Joss pitched his entire career with Cleveland from 1902 to 1910. finished his career with a 1.89 ERA and 160 wins. So obviously, that was a different era of baseball. But Corey Kluber is on that list. He's on maybe not the Mount Rushmore of Cleveland Indians pitchers, but he would be if we were starting in, let's say, 1980 and above, or 1980 and forward. He would obviously be probably the number one guy on that list. A couple other names on the list ahead of Kluber on the all-time earned run average record list for the Indians. Cy Young, as I mentioned, number 6, pitched the first 9 years of his professional career with a team called the Cleveland Spiders. So I hope that if anybody does decide to go back to the Cleveland Spiders and we bring back that name and that logo and nickname, that there's some kind of real attachment to Cy Young. You're talking about a name that everyone in baseball is familiar with and spent the first 9, almost the first decade of his career pitching with the Cleveland Spiders. So he's number 6 on that list. Gaylord Perry, who spent 4 years with the Indians in the 1970s, is number 12 on the list. Louis Tiant, who spent the first 6 seasons of his career with the Indians in the late 60s, is number 16 on the list. And then Sam McDowell, who spent the first 11 years of his career in Cleveland during the 1960s, is number 18 on the list. So those are some of the names ahead of Corey Kluber, who is, again, at number 23 all-time in earned run average. Again, not a lot of other guys on that list that you will recognize. Really nobody from the modern era is in that top 25 other than Kluber. And so what he did in Cleveland, pretty remarkable during his time here. He's also number 15 in Indians history in wins with 98, 2 spots behind CC Sabathia, who won 106 games in Cleveland, and 5 spots behind Charles Nagy at 129. So obviously, Charles Nagy was the ace, or at least somewhat the ace, on those early to mid '90s teams, and so they won a lot of games with Charles Nagy on the mound. But you think about that, he's right up there, number 15, 5 spots behind Nagy, who's at number 10, 129 wins, and you think about who's number 1 all time, Bob Feller at 266. So Bob Feller, obviously, probably not going to be caught unless the Indians somehow come across another generational talent. You're probably not going to have anyone win 266 games, considering Corey Kluber played on some pretty good teams and was the ace of this staff for quite a while and won 98 games during his time in Cleveland. So, you're probably not going to catch Bob Feller. Feller's also the all-time Cleveland baseball leader in WAR at 65.2, and we can certainly cover what WAR is for those non-kind of baseball nerds out there, since it's really a relatively new statistic. But Kluber's 8th in the history of the Indians in WAR at 32.2, so not even close to where Bob Feller was. That guy was an incredible all-time talent. Again, probably not going to be caught in many of these different categories. Corey Kluber is 8th all-time in the Indians in winning percentage. So, again, think about that. He's 8th in winning percentage, won 98 games, and Bob Feller's at 266. So pretty remarkable what Bob Feller did with the Cleveland Indians. Corey Kluber finished his time in Cleveland 1 spot ahead of Bartolo Colon and 2 spots behind Cliff Lee. So a couple guys that most Indians fans are very, very familiar with from the late 90s, early 2000s. Mike Clevenger, who is obviously the number 2 starter on the Indians right now, is actually 4th on that list of winning percentage, although he, again, could have used that win over the weekend, although I don't think he would have got credit for the win in the bottom of the 9th. But the all-time leader in winning percentage in Indians history is not Bob Feller. It's actually Orel Hershiser. So he had a .682 winning percentage. He only pitched 3 seasons, with the Indians. When he was 36 years old is when he started with the Indians, finished at 38. He went 45-21 in those 3 seasons with the Indians. So he's the all-time leader in winning percentage. So, again, just wanted to cover that because for me that was a kind of a sad moment to hear about Corey Kluber. Again, this is a guy who really gutted it out for the Indians the last decade and was a big part of their success and was a guy you could always count on to go out there and take the mound and really be a factor for the Indians. And so it was tough to really hear that, his season's over and, probably potentially his career at least as a front end starter again, wish him a speedy recovery, but we'll see what happens from here. But I wish Corey Kluber the best, and I know everyone in Cleveland does as well. So hopefully he'll make a speedy recovery and come back in some capacity this season, or at least be ready to go by the beginning of next season. And with that, I'm going to get into my last topic of the episode. Again, I wanted to cover the extra innings fiasco and what Mike Clevenger had to say and kind of where that will go and whether I think that's a good idea. But there's a whole lot to unpack there. I think obviously what happened to the Indians over the weekend on Saturday really brings it all home. I think it was all theoretical until you saw it play out in a way that really leaves a bad taste in your mouth. If you love baseball and if you're a traditionalist, you know that Mike Clevenger is right when he said that it's very, very difficult to get a guy on second base against the back end of a bullpen. And so I'm not sure how I feel about that, but we'll break into that on the next episode. We'll dive into what Mike Clevenger had to say, kind of what happened with the Royals and the Indians, and then talk a little bit about moving forward. Is this going to be a good thing for baseball, a bad thing? Will it even out over time? Or is this something that we think could be, one and done? Will they have to change this? Obviously, if they move back into a normal season of baseball, hopefully in 2021. But last topic that I wanted to cover for today is Jose Ramirez. Jose Ramirez, obviously one of the key Indians, one of the guys that they're counting on to be a core part of this team and a core part of this lineup. And he really showed up over the weekend, certainly on Sunday, as a guy that really looked like he's swinging a great bat. Hit 2 home runs on Sunday against the Royals, one from each side of the plate, and both of those home runs were basically no-doubters. And so not necessarily because of length, he's not hitting the Jim Thome-type home runs that maybe people in the 90s would have been used to, where you're hitting the scoreboard or out of the stadium. But you knew the moment that those balls left the bat, they were gone. They were getting out of there. They were getting into the seats. There wasn't going to be anyone out there to catch them, but they were going to hit some seats the moment they left the bat. He just had that kind of swing. There was that kind of noise when it hit the bat. You just kind of knew the moment that he put that swing on the ball that it was gone. And so that's the Jose Ramirez they need. That's the guy who has been a mainstay in this lineup and a factor for much of the last 3 to 4 seasons. Really has been the emergence of Jose Ramirez. Really emerged in 2016 when they went to the World Series. Had 11 home runs and 22 steals that year. Hit .312. And was one of those guys that really started to emerge at age 23. And now at age 27, this is the guy they need to show up and produce every day. And so he showed that over the weekend. Sunday with the 2 home runs, he went 3 for 4. He had 4 runs batted in, scored 4 runs. He's hitting .417 on the season. So obviously a really good start and a really good sign after the start that he got off to last season. Now obviously, we're in July, and I can tell you he did hit the cover off the ball last July. So maybe that has something to do with it. But if you go back to the 2019 season, Jose Ramirez got off to a horrendous start. And that really impacted the team, I felt like, the first half of the year. There were question marks about Jose Ramirez. Is he the same guy? What happened? And when I say horrendous start, the guy hit 181 in April and March last season. So obviously that's a time of year where a lot of guys maybe don't hit so great historically in Cleveland with the weather. But he ended the first half of the season hitting 218. And so that's a guy that you expect to hit close to 300, 270, at least, like he did in 2018. And, he's hitting 218 for the first half of the season. And so there were serious concerns with Jose Ramirez the first half of last year. Now he ended up hitting 327 the second half of the season. And I don't think a lot of people realize that, because if you go back and look at his stats for the year, he ended the year at 255. He hit 23 home runs. He had 83 RBIs, 24 steals. And so I don't think a lot of people looked at last season and said, wow, Jose Ramirez had a great year. But if you go to the second half of the year, he was back to being that guy. He was hitting over 320 every month of the year to end the season. So July, August, and then the September, October end of the season. He hit over 320 in each of those months. He hit the majority of his home runs the second half of the year, so he only had 7 home runs the first half of the season, finished the season with 23. So, again, when he was sitting at kind of that middle point of the season, some serious concerns about Jose Ramirez because that was a tremendous drop-off from the previous season. If you go back to 2018, Ramirez hit 39 home runs. He had 38 doubles, 4 triples, drove in 105 runs, had 34 steals, walked 106 times. So he only hit 270 that year, but his on-base percentage was .387. He slugged .552, and he was really a guy that was, one of the key cogs in this team, in this offense. Finished third in the MVP voting for the second straight season. So if you go back to the year before, in 2017, again, this is the year after they went to the World Series. He kind of emerged in that 2016 season, but at age 24 in 2017, Ramirez hit 29 home runs, had 17 steals. He hit 56 doubles in 2017. Led the league in doubles in 2017. So this is a guy who has that power. If he's not putting it out of the park, he's going to put it in the gap. He's going to hit for a double. He also had 6 triples that season. And so he hit .318 in 2017. So this is a guy who, at his best is a 30-30 guy who's going to hit, 35 to 40 doubles, and he should hit you somewhere between, 280 and 320. That's the kind of hitter that you think Jose Ramirez can be. Now, obviously, baseball is not that easy. You're not going to do that every single year unless you're Mike Trout or one of those guys, and maybe Frankie Lindor is on that list, and we'll find out. But obviously, they're counting on Jose Ramirez, and so I think what we saw over the weekend, and especially on Sunday, was a really good sign for the Indians. It was a really good sign for Jose Ramirez. Again, kind of continuing and picking up where he left off at the end of last season. A guy who hit .327 in the second half, starting off the season this year with .417. I don't like his strikeout to walk ratio so far, 5 strikeouts and only 1 walk, but you could tell he was starting to get that swagger. We're 3 games in. Again, normally we'd have 159 games to go, but we've only got 57 games to go. So a really good sign. They needed Jose Ramirez to get hot because I think you'll see some of the guys behind him, Lindor, Santana, Franmil Reyes, those guys will produce. But right now it's good to see Jose Ramirez hitting the ball well and really having that stroke, having that sweet swing that we saw from him in 2017 and 2018 and then in the second half of 2019. But he's getting right to it here early in the season. And so that'll be a key because if he's hitting like that, and now you've got Lindor hitting behind him instead of hitting leadoff, and then you've got Santana, Franmil Reyes, and some of these other guys, and if Cesar Hernandez is setting the table the way that he did over the weekend, now you've really got something. Now you've really got a lineup that could potentially be, again, one of the better lineups in baseball, at least at the top half of the lineup, one of the better lineups in the American League at the very least. And if you combine that with that pitching staff that we saw over the weekend, I think that there is, the potential with this team now to be a real competitor here for the American League. Obviously, we'll see the Minnesota Twins look pretty good over the weekend against the Chicago White Sox. So we know that the Indians and the Twins are going to have some battles. We know the Indians and the White Sox are going to have some battles. And they start a series this week with the Chicago White Sox. Monday's game already rained out. But we'll see what happens kind of the rest of the week. I'm very intrigued to see how they hold up against this White Sox team. This is going to be interesting. The White Sox have a lot of young talent. They've signed some guys in the offseason. Dallas Keuchel. They brought in the former Indian, Edwin Encarnacion, to hit in the middle of that lineup. So that was a guy that Cleveland fans were used to rooting for a little while. Now he'll be on the other side, a la Jack Parkman. In the movie Major League 2, and so we'll see what that looks like, but really excited for some of these battles, and hopefully we'll get to see it. Again, next episode we'll get into the Miami Marlins situation and what happened there. Obviously that's not a good sign for the rest of baseball, the way that kind of took off within the team. So, hopefully we'll be able to continue talking about the actual games that are going on and not just theoretical situations with the Indians, but we'll see how this plays out. Obviously, we want everyone to stay safe. We want everyone to be healthy, and we want sports. We want to be able to watch sports. We want to be able to see what this Indians team might be capable of with the guys that they have on this roster, with the way this pitching staff looked over the weekend. So I'm incredibly excited to see what's going to happen in the future, assuming we do have a future with Major League Baseball here over the next few months. And we'll get into that on the next show. We'll talk about COVID-19 and what could potentially happen. Hopefully we'll have a little bit better idea of what's going on there. We'll see what happens with the Philadelphia Phillies. Their game got canceled with the New York Yankees, so we'll have a little bit of a better idea, hopefully, of what that's going to look like. We'll get into the extra innings and the new rules and kind of what that's going to look like, and I'm sure there will be a lot more to talk about. But appreciate you listening. Give us a follow, again, on Twitter. If you want to follow me, it's BcastOhio. If you want to follow this podcast, it's Just Outside Pod. And we'd love to hear from you, what you thought about the show, good, bad, and the ugly. Happy to incorporate some of that into future episodes. So thanks again for listening, and talk to you soon.